This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Gain unlimited access to thousands of classes for less than $10 a month. Click the link down below to get 2 free months of premium membership and explore your new and existing passions. Today, we're going to talk about editing. Is editing an essential part of photography, or is it something that needs to be discouraged? If you edit your photos, does that mean it's not real photography? If editing is cheating, then why do so many pros and educators tell you to shoot RAW in the first place? Who do you trust? It's certainly a big debate in photography community, and the short answer for why that's the case is probably because there is no right answer. So this video isn't necessarily about what you should do or shouldn't do, but I thought I would just share my honest thoughts and start a discussion here. Is editing cheating? Exactly what types of editing are there, and what is okay and not okay? How much should you edit, and how do you know when to stop? So is editing cheating? And there are obviously people on both ends of the extremes, and some people edit their photos to the point they're completely altering the reality, and some people say that you're not even supposed to crop your photos. Like with many things in life, it's generally good to stay somewhere in the middle. And some of my photos look good right out of the camera, and some other photos, I admit, do require some more work. I'm a very opinionated person myself, and when I see someone's photos that clearly wasn't a great photo before their extensive editing, or when I see some photos that could greatly benefit from some light editing, I form my own judgments against them, but I don't necessarily point that out to them unless they ask for my opinions. I personally don't like to heavily edit my photos, but I also don't like to set up any rules or boundaries to limit myself either. I'm not saying that's what everyone should do, but that's just my personality. Whenever someone tells me that I'm not supposed to do something, my mind always seems to go straight to work on finding loopholes in the argument, and the next moment that's all I'm thinking about instead of actually focusing on what I'm supposed to be doing. With the question of is editing cheating, the first thing that we all have to remember is that we are all on different playing fields. Some of us are journalists, some of us are artists, some of us take photos for our own pleasure, and some of us shoot for different clients. Whenever you're shooting for a client, the photographer doesn't always get to fully control how the photos get used. What if they print your photos on a billboard, or a magazine spread, or a website, or a social media post? Your photos are almost always going to be cropped or altered in one way or another, and very often you actually have to shoot your photos with the crop in mind. Does that mean that's cheating, or does that mean it's not real photography? I think that's a bit unreasonable. Product photography is a great example because very often the clients won't have the final product ready for the photo shoot, so you're gonna have to shoot a prototype so they can Photoshop in whatever the final product should look like. And what if the product is gonna be exported to 100 different countries and it's gonna be printed in 100 different languages? Does that mean you're gonna do the photo shoot 100 times? Some say that photo editing is a new phenomenon that was started with digital photography, and shooting film is the only honest way of doing photography. But this couldn't be further away from the truth. Photo editing has been done for a very, very long time, long before the invention of digital photography or Photoshop, by many famous photographers since the beginning of photography. Ansel Adams is probably the most famous example. With digital photography and softwares like Lightroom and Photoshop and even Instagram, photo editing has become certainly easier and more accessible for a lot of people, but the idea or the concept of editing is nothing new. And if your idea of real photography is the accurate representation of reality, I mean, have you even shot film? Does anybody really shoot film because it's the most accurate representation of the real world? The point is, whenever you're taking a photo with any camera or a lens, you are already altering the reality to some degrees. I mean, simply shooting in black and white or doing long exposures, that's not real, is it? What if your lens has some severe vignetting or distortion? Should you not fix that in post because it's more real that way? And if you really look at this in a more philosophical point of view, whenever you're setting up all the lights and the backdrops and putting on makeups on people, isn't that in essence editing? I mean, it certainly is not an honest depiction of reality, so if you can do that in post more effectively and efficiently, is that such a wrong thing to do? Obviously, I'm not saying that's the better way to do things, but all I'm saying is that editing in today's society is almost inevitable, and we're all trying to create different results for different reasons for different clients. So I don't think we should set up any universal rules that says editing is bad or that this is the exact line that we're not supposed to cross. Of course, if you choose not to edit your photos, that's your choice, but you also shouldn't try to control what everyone else is doing because it'll only make you miserable. Also, you have to remember that there's a big difference between not editing your photos because you don't want to and not editing your photos because you don't know how. And if you're not really familiar with how, I would highly recommend to at least learn so you can understand exactly what you can do with your photos and what is possible. And if you still choose not to edit your photos, then that's fine, but this whole mentality of everything being so black and white or right and wrong will generally keep you pretty close-minded, and you just always have to remember that it's all about moderation. I get a lot of requests from people to do editing tutorials, but this is one of the reasons why I've never done one, because everyone's different and everyone has a different style, and the way I edit my photos will only benefit a very small group of people. But if you're solely interested in learning how to edit your photos or how to use Photoshop or Lightroom and things like that, there are many videos you can look up on Skillshare, and I still watch those videos too because you should never stop learning. There are generally 4 different types of editing: cropping, correction, enhancement, and alteration. Cropping is pretty self-explanatory, and my ideas towards cropping are quite simple. And I generally have no problem with cropping because sometimes, like I said, you just can't control it. But cropping should be done only when it's necessary, because when you're cropping too much, you're basically just throwing away your resolution. I don't think it's really realistic to expect that our photos should always be shown at the exact ratio that it was taken at. And whether you want to crop your photos or stitch them together to make a panorama or whatever, I think should be left to the photographer's vision and the creative freedom. And the next one is correction. Correction is an interesting one. Correction is done when you're editing your photos to better match the reality with things like white balance or vignetting or distortion, and I don't think a lot of people will be against the idea of that. Like I said, whenever you're taking a photo with any camera, you are changing the reality one way or another, because it will never be 100% accurate representation of what you saw with your eyes or what the objective reality was. Some of this can be done on the camera, but that's also editing, and all lenses and cameras are different, and at least some level of correction are always needed. And then there are enhancements and alterations. Enhancements are similar to corrections, but this is when you're pushing things one step further to make things really believable. For example, let's say you took a photo of a rainbow, but when you saw it on the screen, it doesn't look as amazing as what you saw with your eyes. So you bump up the vibrance and saturation to make the rainbow a little more prominent, but not to the point to make it look unrealistic. Or dynamic range is a great example, and cameras by its nature can capture a lot less dynamic range than what our human eyes can see. So in post, you can either bring up the shadows or pull down the highlights or shoot in HDR mode, or you can shoot several shots and compose them all together manually in post later, or you can go the other way and give your photo more contrast. And again, the whole point of this is not to make your photo look artificial, but to make it look more real and natural, to make it more believable. Illustrators actually use this technique a lot. When they draw or paint, they would often make the highlights and shadows more dramatic to give the subject more volume, even though that's not exactly what their eyes see. Alteration is the most controversial one, because this is when you're editing your photos to the point past the reality. This includes things like swapping out the backgrounds, or adding new elements, or taking out elements, or making people look better. The possibilities are endless. Again, in moderation, it's quite acceptable. Let's say you're taking a portrait of someone and the person has a big pimple on their face, or a little lint or a stain on their clothes. It's not an essential part of who they are, and it's pretty easy to get rid of them in post, so it makes no sense to leave them in the photo forever. But with things like smoothing out their skin, or changing their facial features, or making them look skinny, you're changing the essence of who they are. This is usually where I stop unless the model or the client specifically asks me to change something. Sometimes your model might have a permanent scar or a tattoo that your client doesn't want to show, so it all depends on the situation, and if you're not shooting for a client, the choice is yours. So again, there's really no right answer for this, and you can edit your photos as much or as little as you like. You don't have to do anything that you might feel guilty about, and you don't have to attack others for the way they edit their photos, and you also don't have to listen to others attacking you for the way you do your photography. People have always argued about different ways of doing things: DSLR versus mirrorless, film versus digital, natural light versus flash. And when photography was first invented, other artists didn't even want to consider photography as a form of art. And I don't think this whole debate about editing is any different. I think what's more important than choosing a side is to develop your own style. If you get too hung up on following or enforcing ambiguous rules, you'll always fall behind as cameras and technologies change over time. And if you ignore the basics and rely too much on post-processing, and if you use that as your excuse to take bad photos, you're really not going to go far as a photographer either. This isn't really a matter of if your photos are good or not. We can all grow and improve at our own pace, and over time our tastes can change as well. I feel like if you keep doing whatever looks and feels right to you for a long time, you start to develop your own style, and if you have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve with your camera and your photos, then it shouldn't really matter what others think or how others are editing their photos. I'd like to take this moment to thank our sponsor Skillshare for making this video possible. And if you want to learn more about photo editing or any basic or advanced level photography, you can get access to thousands of great classes on Skillshare for less than $10 a month. And if you go to the link down in the description, you can get 2 free months of premium membership, so make sure to check that out. So that's it for me today. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments, what do you guys think about photo editing? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? How do you edit your photos? Let me know in the comments, and thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.